Hi, and welcome to this Excosoft webinar about translation in Skribenta Web. My name is Jonathan Lundin, and I will be the presenter today. And for those who haven't met me before, I'm a technical communicator, I guess like most of you. And I've been working with Excosoft for some 10 years now. With XML-based content management, structuring, organizing content. I'm also really interested in user behavior, so I did my PhD studies about how users search and read in documentation and how to design to support such behaviors. Now, the purpose of today's webinar is to present the translation functions in our new client called Skribenta Web. So throughout the webinar, I'm going to compare the existing Skribenta client, which you are using, to the functionalities in Skribenta Web. So for the audience of this webinar, I assume that you are familiar with Skribenta client and the way you can translate in Skribenta client, because I'm going to compare Skribenta client and Skribenta Web to some extent. Okay, I'm actually going to switch off the camera so we can focus on the demo and the slides. Great, thanks for taking the time to join this webinar. So the agenda is that I'm going to make a brief intro and then present the overall translation process in Skribenta Web, and then make this comparison between the existing client Skribenta client, which all of you are using, and the new translation functions in Skribenta Web. And then delve into some of the details and the features of the translation functions in Skribenta Web that can support you being even more efficient when it comes to translating content. And at the end, I'm going to wrap up and propose a suggestion for how we at Excosoft can support you in making the transition from Skribenta client to Skribenta Web. And at the end, there will be a question and answering session. Just for your information, this webinar is recorded, so it will be available on our restarted YouTube channel. And furthermore, we will write a blog post about the key points in this webinar. So you can find that on our website later on. And of course, you have a lot of questions, but you can send them to my colleague, Jan Christian Herlitz, who is in the meeting using a Teams quick message. You can hover over Jan Christian's icon in the meeting and create a quick message question. He will collect these and then post them in the meeting at the end of the last session. So have you noticed the chat will be disabled until then? Okay, great. So let's go. Of course, as you probably know, our focus at Excosoft is to support you in being more effective. So the translation functions in Skribenta, they are designed with the aim to help you to cut costs, because translation is a costly business, but also to cut or to reach time to market and retain quality. This is very important. So this is the foundation to everything we do when designing translation functions. So we're looking at who is actually translating in Skribenta. What do we think would be the possibilities in Skribenta Web regarding translations? So if we look at Skribenta, the traditional most common use case is that you create a translation project in Skribenta, and you as a technical communicator, or you have a colleague who is a translation coordinator, creates this translation project. And you prepare a translate this file. So you send this translate this file, which is an XML file, to an external translator who's using a translation tool like Trados to translate and then send back. You receive the translate this file, which you upload to Skribenta. So this is a very common use case, which will still be available in Skribenta Web, of course. But I'm thinking about how could we support you in being more effective when it comes to translating. and to reduce cost. We see that many of you have in-house translator. That's a colleague in the local market, the local region somewhere in the world, who knows the localized market, who knows about the users and knows about the products that you are developing and selling. So what if this resource would be able to log into Skribenta and do translations directly, so you don't have to send anything to an external translator? So this is a possibility now in Skribenta Web to involve in-house translators. But furthermore, if you create and organize the translation project, we have seen also over the years, looking at how our customers work, that there are certain text that you can translate yourself, even if you don't know the language, due to the nature of the actual text, like technical data and other aspects. So what if you could pre-translate before sending to an external translator, so that the external translator gets translate this file that has less block, which costs, making you more efficient. So these are some of the possibilities that we think you would like to be able to do, which we have incorporated in Skribenta Web. So, but if looking at the current functionality in Skribenta Client, which we think is good for what it's designed to do. But when listening to you and over the years, we learned that to be even more translation cost effective, to go from 90 to 100 being effective in some sense, we see that the current functionality may be hindering you to some extent. So let's have a look. In Skribenta Client, it is challenging to involve in-house translator because they must edit raw XML in the block editor, which is maybe not so user-friendly. You can only edit one block at a time. And it's also difficult to optimize the memory, meaning to delete blocks, add blocks, copy translation between blocks. And every time you create a translation project and you analyze it, you create new blocks, empty blocks in the memory, which sort of increases the size of the memory. And also, while having an ongoing translation project, it's not easy to, you cannot add a new language or close a specific language. And this was something you have asked us that this must be possible, since translations may not always be in sync. You also know that once a project is closed, you cannot upload or translate this file if you receive a new one from the translator vendor. And also the case that a project owns its blocks, which means that it kind of can create a complex situation if you translate in parallel, if you have multiple translation projects ongoing in parallel. So we listened to sort of your feedback about this and thought, okay, let's make the translation functions and the translation process somewhat more flexible. So in thinking about how we could do that, we thought about, when working with translations, you follow the same kind of design process and iterative way of working as you would work with a source language. In some extent, maybe not exactly, but in some extent, that would be the case. So if you look at how you work with the source language and how you create and edit the source language content. So you create a master file, you write, you copy paste, you structure, you save, and you delete, expand things, and you may find that this wasn't good, you rechange it, you redo, search and replace, and until you find that now we have a decent level of quality, you check in and you publish. So we thought about, well, this way of working, allowing you to use the same editing capabilities as in the source language, why not introduce that also when working with translations? So when you translate now in Skribenta Web, you create something called a job file. So within the translation project, you have a job file. This is actually an XML file or flex file, similar to a master file. So you have access to the same way of expanding and compressing, making things bold and copy, paste, search, replace. But we have seen the way that our customers that you work is that, of course, the main use case is that you translate, you add the translations. But you also have the need to maybe to copy and paste between blocks and to save things and search and replace, etc. You can work with these aspects with many blocks in the same go into job file, which is similar to working with a master file. And then when you feel now my translations are ready, then you can update the memory to create the blocks in the memory, and then you can publish. So this use case I'm presenting here would be applied to when you work to translate yourself, or you have an in-house translator which work with its translations directly in Skribenta. But also when you optimize the memory, we have seen that it's a good case to have access to these editing functions. Okay, so how does this look like then in Skribenta Web? I'm going to present here a basic use case of creating a translation project and translate. So for this purpose, I have a demo, of course. So here I have a demo publication, fixtures company called Hydrofor, and they have a product called HP6W. And here we have the master file. It has a lot of variables and conditions and stuff. So I'm not going to delve into these details now, but you see here we have a lot of content. So I can actually, let me build the PDFs for this publication. So I can right click, select publish. And here I have already selected the style sheet. I have selected Swedish, which is the source language for this publication. And I also want to translate or publish the translation to American English. So the publishing process initiate, I can click view, and this is the Swedish version, the source language text. It's not the biggest manual in the world, but it has some content, like a demo publication. We can then have a look at the American English version. So I click view, and this is the version generated from the translation memory. So now we have the translated text. So what if I want to add some content? I will update this publication to write something. So I prepared. I have actually some content actually in a Word file. This is the purpose of showing you that you can copy and paste things from Word directly. So here I have a set of sort of fixtures warnings. So I just mark them and I select copy. And then we go back to Skribenta. I go to my publication, and let's say I want to add these warnings before the installation chapter. So I paste, and then we have created a section for the warnings. So this is simple warnings, warning text. I can actually make them warnings by wrapping them and then select using a wrapper menu and select warning. So I create a warning wrapper. Let me close this one. So now one nice feature in Skribenta Web is that you can look into the memory while creating the source language text to see if there are any similar text which I can use. For this title here, which says viktiga varningar, important warnings, that would be in English, I can actually right click and select the title. And then here I'm presented with a toolbar where I can look at similar. So what I do here is I want to find similar blocks in the memory. So what I expand the panel where I can view the existing blocks in the memory. So here we see that, here I have already a block which says viktiga säkerhetsvarningar. And I think, but that is actually better. And it already has a lot of translations, and I can expand them to see that this Swedish source text already has all these translations in all these languages. Great. So I can click on use, which means that then I will use this, and this will not create a translation missing. Okay. So let's publish this Again, just for the purpose of showing you that the expected result would be that the source language is okay, but we have two warnings, two translation missing. That's, of course, these are the two texts that I've added because they haven't been created in the memory. So if you look at the American English text, we see that, aha, so here we have translation missing for these two. And at the end, we also are presented, as usual, as you have today, a list of warnings you can navigate. Okay, so now I want to translate. So in this case, I go to the translation aspect. And it is in the translation aspect, this is similar to the translation project view in the Skribenta client. So here I have my ongoing translation projects. And I have a choice of creating 3 different types of projects. One is to create a translation project to translate the delta. I can create an improvement project to improve an existing translation, to make a revision of translation. Or this is new, an extension project, which is to, this is used when I want to migrate legacy content. Let's say that you have FrameMaker, Word, or InDesign files which have a translation. You can then import the source and then the target, and then you can align them. So aligning is very important so that the source and the target actually are aligned. But for this purpose, I will create a translation project and get a new one. So in this case, TP translation project 208. And this is then a flex file. So you edit this in the same way as you edit the master file when you work with the source languages. So you can add comments, project. You can add a subtitle. And in this section, you actually create your translation jobs. So you are presented with a table where you can select the source language. In this case, it's Swedish. The target is American English. You select the provider, and here you have 4 options. You can do it by hand, that is, they can do it yourself. You can send the file to a translation vendor, and this is corresponds to what you do now in Skribenta client, that you prepare, translate this file, and you send it, and receive and upload. You can select a translation agency if you have an integration to some. So this means that Skribenta will send the blocks to the agency directly. You don't have to send them manually. Or you can actually pick a translator. So this is another user in Skribenta, an in-house translator. It could be your colleague in a localized local country. So when translator 1 would log in, they would only see the translation job file and do the work. They don't see anything else. This I showed you on the webinar about why move to Skribenta Web. In this case, I will do it by hand, and we select what it is that we want to translate. In this case, I want to translate a publication because this is the one I showed you. So I can then browse. We have our demo. This is the Hydro 4 AP6W, and I select, in this case, an edition, and then I click Analyze. So when analyzing, Skribenta looks into the memory to see, okay, which of the blocks in the source language master exist in the memory and which does not. So here we have a job file. This is a link to a job file, which I can expand. And here I see that I have 2 blocks which does not exist in the memory. Of course, this is what we created. So to translate these, I'm going to head over to my Word file because I already prepared the English. So I just paste. And then, okay, so here I now have the translation of these 2. As you can see here, I have access to the same editing functions as I use for the source language. Of course, the job file represents the blocks that needs to be translated. That's the essential part, nothing else. But when I'm done with the job file, save it, I can then click on update. And update here means that I'm actually creating then the blocks in the memory. So we click update, and then we have 2 blocks are updated. Okay, so I can then go to my publication. We can have a look. Have a look at the English version. So in this case, there's no warnings. I can open it up and we have the English, and here we see this is the translated part. Okay, I think you get it. This is the basic use case of then creating a translation project and translating the delta. So you see here the same basic functionalities as we have in Skribenta client, only translating the delta is there. There's a built-in translation memory, and all of these fundamental aspects are retained. Those are not changed. Okay, so, but there is one difference that I would like to highlight between Skribenta client, the way you work today, and Skribenta Web, and that comes to when working with parallel projects, where you translate in parallel and you have the same source language text in multiple publications. So how does that work in Skribenta client? Just to refresh your memory, let's say that you had a publication with 3 blocks. You create a translation project, and when you analyze, you create the blocks in the memory, and they have an identity, and then you can translate by sending the translate this file and receive it and upload. Let's say that now in parallel, while this is ongoing, and someone else, maybe it's you or your colleague, who is translating a publication which has technical data is the same here. And this person creates translation project 2, and when analyzing, you create the blocks in the memory. But here's the case that the block with the technical data is owned by project 1. So this is the case now in Skribenta client, that there's an ownership, which maybe could create a complex situation because you have to close project 1 before you can close project 2. So there's dependencies between projects, and the status of the blocks create also sort of could create a complicated situation. So what we thought about this to make it more flexible and that it could work independently of the projects. So in Skribenta Web, if you have the same publication, you create a translation project. Now you create a job file, and in this job file, then you can translate. You haven't created any blocks in the memory yet. So you can work in the job file as a flex file, translating several blocks and do a lot of stuff. Then someone else has translation project 2 and creates a job file and translates. So this could be independently of each other. Let's say now that the translation project 1, this person makes an update. Now we're creating the blocks in the memory, and they get an identity. Now, if project 2 is doing an update, we see that, well, here we have a conflict because technical data is translated to tekniska data in project 1, but tekniska parametrar in project 2. So when you update in translation project 2, then Skribenta will highlight to you saying, here we have a conflict because there's 2 possibilities. Technical data is tekniska data, but you have selected translate tekniska parametrar. Which one do you want to choose? You have an option to select the best translation. So this is one way of resolving the conflict. Another way is that you could use translation hints to actually explicitly say, I want to have 2 blocks where technical data is translated to 2 different Swedish. So that is the same approach as today, to use translation hints. Well, this is kind of abstract and complicated, but just to highlight that this is a kind of a big difference in Skribenta Web when it comes to be able to work in parallel with projects. Okay, so what are the new features then in Skribenta Web when it comes to translation? There is a lot of new features which will help you to be more flexible and reduce translation costs. So I go to present the list and then pick some of the important features which I think is, yeah, that you would like to see. So there's a lot of new features when it comes to translating. As maybe I mentioned that now you can add new languages in a translation project. So, and you can actually work with the language independently of one another within a project, which I think is something you have asked for. You can work with multiple source languages in the same Skribenta environment. And you can translate a file. So these are some of the features. There's also added possibilities of migrating translations. So if you have Word or FrameMaker, InDesign, or some HTML files which are translated, you can add them in an extension project and then align the source and the target, which is something that is happening, that you have legacy content that you want to migrate. The way that you can improve existing translations with an improvement project has also been enhanced. So now when you do an improvement project, you can actually search for blocks in the memory. So there's a query function which allows you to, for instance, search on all blocks in a particular publication. You can search for blocks with a certain ID or blocks having a certain text. And a good thing here is that when you do an improvement project for a publication, the way the blocks are presented is in the same order as in the publication, which is very easy to find a block. When you work in the job files, there's a lot of possibilities here to use the same editing functions as when you edit the source language text. So you can, for instance, add a new block. You can add a translation to a block. Of course, these are specific features for working with a job file. But you can copy and paste and search and replace and find similar in these aspects, which we have seen. We have customers already using the translation function. They've seen that this flexibility is something that is it's a good thing. Now, when you edit the built-in memory, you can delete a block and delete a memory version or delete a translation within a block. And of course, when you update, you create a new blocks in the memory. And also this possibility of resolving conflicts arising from different translations through the same source language. And also now something that's possible is that you can use a dedicated memory for a workspace. So for instance, if you have multiple workspaces, you can have one memory for each workspace. And you can import and export blocks between workspace memories. And finally, when it comes to working within the translation blocks, you know, when you have generalized sentences where, you know, variables and links are not presented to the translator, you get a label, and now in Skribenta Web, these are numbered because when translating, these can have different arrangement order depending on the language, depending on the syntax, etc. So this is better presented, the numbering of these phrases. There's also an enhanced possibility of getting warnings for ambiguities and resolving ambiguities. And you know that ambiguities is the case where you have in the memory two blocks with the same source text, but they have different translation. So when you publish, of course, Skribenta would not know which one to pick. So there's an enhanced way of working and resolving ambiguities as such. But okay, I would like to show you the way to add a new language in an ongoing translation project, and also this improvement project, doing a query to find blocks, and use the editing functions in the job file and edit multiple blocks in the memory and update. Okay, let us go to Skribenta and let's head over to the translation project. So here we have the one we created. To add a new language, what I can do is I can click the tab to create a new table row, actually. And here I can specify an additional language. So in this case, it's still Swedish, but let's say I want to translate to German. And again, I want to translate by hand, and I want to translate the same publication. So I can actually place my cursor. This is a publication link, Control C. Control V to copy. And I can expand to view the content of this to see, okay. And of course, I can write some status if I want. And then I analyze. In this case, I create a new job file for the German translation, and we see that it's 154 words to be translated. I open the job file and I can expand. This is sections. So here we see the blocks with the Swedish, and there is no German translation. And in this case, I'm not going to bore you with trying to translate this to German. So I prepared. As to say that I have to show you also that you can copy things from other formats. So I can then sort of can paste, and I can put my cursor on this text, select copy and paste, and work, editing this job file as I would edit any file. And I can select something. I can add bold. Now there's no bold in the target, so this might not be appropriate. But you can see I can work with multiple blocks in the job file in one go. So I have all the, so this would be the in-house translator, for instance, would see this job file. You can then work directly the translations. And when you're done, you can click update. So then I would publish this to German. I will of course get a lot of translation missing, but I have at least some German translations added here. Okay, let us close. And also the thing that I can reanalyze. I can analyze the same translation job multiple times. So I can click this analyze button as many times and update as many times as I want. Now, let's say that I would like to improve the American English. So I can create an improvement project. And in this case, it has a different background. I select that I want to sort of work with the same languages. I do it by hand, and I browse, and I will use, I want to improve the translation for this particular publication. And we make a query. In this case, I get a job file which includes all the blocks, including then the American English translation. And they are structured in the same order as they appear in the master file. So here you see this is the main title. This is some warnings in the beginning. What this improvement project allows me to do is to, of course, to change the American English text. For instance, let's say that I would like to search and replace. I want to find everything that says connect. Let's see if we have any connect. So here I have some connect. And I can then replace and say I want this to be installed instead. We can then search and replace and say, okay, so now I've changed multiple blocks with the search and replace. And also I can expand and see the translations for, so here we have, for instance, the new text I added. If I click on this button, I will see, I can expand and see all the translations for this particular Swedish source language. And here we have Arabic and Chinese and what else. And I can also work with the translation. I can copy translations from one block and paste to another. I can create a translation in a block. I can delete a block. So I can do things that is sort of convenient to optimize the memory. And now when I'm done improving, I can update. And here I could make a query for instance, all of the words. Let's say that we want to find all blocks that has install. Actually going to remove, you can make a query. So now I find blocks that has this in actually now it seems that when trying this out I add English into Swedish, but anyhow I can make a query for blocks that has a certain text and then I'm searching for the source language. So this is a way of improving existing translations and adding translation jobs, existing translation project. So I hope I've demonstrated the flexibility and the possibilities while working with the translation functions in Skribenta Web. Good. So making the transition to Skribenta Web. So what we suggest, of course, we support you in doing this. So of course, we set up a meeting to discuss with you about your translation process and the way your memory is built or how it looks like to make sort of analysis of if it's possibility to optimize, etc. You have a lot of questions. And you maybe have customizations relating to integration to translators. Discuss this with you against the service level agreement. There's also a case if you want to work with Skribenta Client and Skribenta Web in parallel. There are some policies that we would set up. So what to do where. We would recommend to only translate in Skribenta Web and not in Skribenta Client. So we will need to find a sort of a time window where you have closed all the ongoing translation projects. And of course, this involves upgrading your Skribenta. Maybe you have a stage server that needs to be upgraded first. This can also involve basic Skribenta Web training, depending on your need and your process and your server level agreement. So get in touch with your Excosoft contact to sort of set this thing on the chart to get going, to make the transition from Skribenta Client to Skribenta Web. And just to mention that what I've been talking about today is the translation functionality in Skribenta Web. Now, to optimize the memory, to reduce cost, there is this craftsmanship of working with the content, the source language content, something we could refer to as generalizing, meaning that you can reuse the same translation for multiple different paragraphs in your source content. And you use variables, you use value phrases, you use affix phrases and all these aspects. And this way of optimizing the memory so that you can use the same translations for as many paragraphs as possible. This is something we would like to present in an upcoming webinar about optimizing your translation memory. Okay, so really thank you for attending this webinar. Thank you for your time to be here. We would appreciate any feedback you would like to give us. So you can follow this URL or scan this QR code to enter that you can send us some feedback.